The last thing I expected when I came home early was to find another man in my bed with my wife. I'm Michael, and for 30 years, I've built a life that I thought was unshakable. I've worked my way up as an engineer, running a business that I started from scratch. I'm not the kind of guy who lets emotions cloud his judgment. My wife, Karen, and I had a routine, a partnership built on what I assumed was mutual respect and trust. We weren't flashy, but we had stability. I took pride in the home I built and the life we created. Sundays were for slow mornings and family dinners. Weekends were often spent out on Second Wind, my 33-foot motorboat. I've always loved the sea, and though Karen didn't share that passion, she came along enough to humor me. That was how we worked, different interests shared life. At least that's what I believed. Looking back now, I realize I ignored the signs. Karen had been different for months. She started coming home late from the law firm, claiming she was swamped with meetings. Her phone became an extension of her hand, always locked and turned away. And then there was the change in how she looked. New clothes, that floral perfume she used to hate, the makeup she hadn't bothered with in years. I brushed it off. She was my wife. Why wouldn't I trust her? Then came that Thursday night. A client canceled a meeting last minute, giving me the rare chance to wrap up early. I decided to surprise Karen, maybe grab dinner at her favorite place. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed her car parked as usual. The house was lit up, the curtains drawn, nothing out of the ordinary. But as soon as I walked in, something felt off. It was the sound, low, muffled voices from upstairs, followed by a laugh I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. I dropped my bag near the door and took the stairs two at a time. My pulse quickened, every step hammering in my chest. When I reached the top, I heard it clearly, her laugh. And his voice. The bedroom door was open just enough for me to see them. Karen and her boss, Richard, tangled in the sheets, completely unaware of my presence. My presence. In my own house. My vision went red. I slammed the door open so hard it cracked against the wall, startling them both. Karen shrieked and pulled the blanket up to her chest. Richard scrambled to grab his pants, but he didn't get far. "Michael, wait." Karen's voice was high-pitched and panicked. "Wait," I snapped. "You want me to wait?" I didn't wait. Grabbing Richard by his collar, I yanked him off the bed and slammed him against the wall. He was a wiry little man, all talk and no muscle. His eyes went wide as I leaned in close. "You think you could just waltz into my house and take what's mine?" I said through gritted teeth. Hey, let's talk about this." Richard stammered, his hands fumbling in the air. "Talk? Sure. Here's my contribution." My fist connected with his jaw, a solid, satisfying crack that sent him sprawling to the floor. "Michael, stop!" Karen screamed, her voice cracking. I didn't stop. I stepped over Richard as he groaned, grabbing him by the back of his shirt and hauling him to his feet. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low and deadly. "I'll call the cops." Richard gasped, clutching his face. "Good. And when they get here, I'll tell them exactly why you're bleeding on my carpet." Karen started sobbing, begging me to calm down, but I ignored her. I shoved Richard toward the door, then turned to Karen. She was still on the bed, clutching the sheets, her tear-streaked face a picture of guilt and panic. "Don't say a word," I growled. "Not a single word." I grabbed my keys and walked out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Driving into the night, I couldn't shake the image of Karen and Richard from my mind. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. That wasn't me. Instead, I clenched my jaw, stared out at the dark road ahead, and let the storm inside me brew. I pulled into an empty parking lot, killed the engine, and unscrewed the bottle of bourbon I'd picked up along the way. Each fiery sip burned its way down, but it didn't numb the sting of betrayal. How long had this been going on? How stupid had I been not to see it? As I sat there in silence, the questions started piling up. Was this a one-time thing? Or had Karen been sneaking around for months? Years? I stared at my phone as it buzzed on the seat beside me. Call after call, text after text, all from her. "Michael, please answer. Let me explain. Come home. I'm sorry." Sorry? Sorry wasn't good enough. I tossed the phone onto the dashboard, took another swig, and let my mind wander back over the past few months. The signs had been there, clear as day. Karen's late nights at the office. The sudden effort she'd put into her appearance. The way she'd become so secretive with her phone, always tucking it away when I entered the room. And Richard, God, I'd even met him. He'd come over once for some firm dinner, shaking my hand like a man without a care in the world. I remembered Karen laughing at one of his stupid jokes, her hand lingering on his arm just a little too long. Back then I told myself I was imagining things. Now I realized I'd been a fool. The bourbon was half gone when I finally started the truck again. I wasn't going back to that house. Not yet. I needed answers before I even thought about facing her. The next morning, I woke up to the sharp pain of a stiff neck and the stale smell of bourbon in the truck's cab. My phone was still buzzing with messages. I ignored them and headed to a nearby diner for coffee. As I sat at the counter, staring into the black liquid, a plan began to form. I wasn't going to take Karen's word for anything. She'd lied to me once. She'd lie again. If I wanted the truth, I was going to have to find it myself. The first thing I did was head to the office. My business partner, Alex, took one look at me and raised an eyebrow. "Rough night," he asked, waving his hand in front of his nose. "You smell like a distillery." "Rougher than you know," I said, collapsing into the chair opposite his desk. "Karen," he guessed, his tone softening. I nodded. "I caught her. Last night. With her boss." Alex's face tightened. "In your house?" "In my bed," I replied. My voice was steady, but there was a crack beneath it. "Jesus, Michael, I am sorry." "Don't be. I'm not done with her yet." Over the next few days, I became a man on a mission. I started piecing things together, looking for the answers Karen hadn't given me. Her phone was locked tight, but she couldn't hide everything. I found receipts from restaurants I'd never heard of. There was a jewelry store charge on our credit card, something I sure as hell hadn't bought her. And then there was the hotel bill tucked into her purse, with dates that lined up perfectly with her work trips. Each discovery felt like another punch to the gut, but I didn't stop. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. When Karen wasn't around, I searched her email. She'd logged out of her work account, but I found a few forwarded messages in her personal inbox. Casual notes from Richard about meetings that always seemed to run late, complete with winking emojis. The more I found, the angrier I became. This wasn't some mistake, like she'd tried to claim. This was calculated, planned, and I wasn't about to let it slide. A week after I walked out, Karen finally managed to catch me on the phone. "Michael, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I need to talk to you." "Why?" I snapped. "So you can feed me more lies?" "It wasn't what it looked like," she began, but I cut her off. "Don't insult me," I growled. "I saw it with my own eyes. You and him. In my bed. You don't get to explain that away." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not good enough, Karen. I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. 3 months, she admitted. I clenched my jaw, the words hitting me like a hammer. "And you were just going to keep it up? What? Until I found out? Or were you planning to leave me?" "No," she said quickly. "I wasn't. I never wanted to leave you. It just happened." "It just happened?" I barked. "That's the best you've got?" "It didn't mean anything," she added desperately. "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "Karen, it meant enough for you to sneak around behind my back for months. It meant enough for you to bring him into our home. It meant enough for you to throw away 30 years of marriage." Her silence said everything I needed to know. That night, I sat on the deck of my boat, staring out at the water. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Karen's betrayal wasn't just some mistake or moment of weakness. It was a choice she made over and over again. And now, it was my turn to make a choice. This wasn't going to end with me walking away, broken and defeated. No, I wasn't the kind of man who let things slide. If Karen and Richard thought they could destroy my life without consequences, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. As I dove deeper into Karen's deception, the pieces of her betrayal started falling into place like a twisted jigsaw puzzle. Every detail I uncovered only made the picture uglier. It wasn't enough that she had betrayed me with her boss. It wasn't enough that she'd brought him into our home, into our bed. No, Karen had gone further. She'd turned our entire life into a lie. One morning, while she was at work, I decided to take a closer look at the financials. For years, Karen and I had shared everything, a joint account, shared credit cards, the works. But something had changed. Over the past year, there had been small, frequent withdrawals from an account I didn't recognize. I logged into our shared banking app and followed the trail. The account wasn't in her name directly. It was a secondary account connected to a larger one at the bank where she used to work before switching to the law firm. The withdrawals were small, just a few $100s at a time, but they were consistent. Every Friday. Where was that money going? And more importantly, what else was she hiding? I contacted a friend of mine who worked in finance, Rob, and asked him for help. Rob was discreet, and he owed me a favor from way back. "You're saying there's a second account?" Rob asked over the phone, his voice skeptical but concerned. "That's right," I said, "and I need to know everything about it." "All right, give me the details," Rob replied. "This might take a day or two, but I'll find what I can." While Rob worked on that, I turned my attention back to Karen's phone. She'd left it charging in the kitchen when she stepped out for groceries. I wasn't proud of snooping, but at this point I didn't care about pride. The phone was locked, but I noticed a notification pop up on the screen, a message from Richard. My blood boiled. Can't stop thinking about last time. When can we meet again? I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I stopped myself. Instead, I grabbed a pen and jotted down his number. If I was going to confront this bastard again, I needed to know more. That night, Rob called me back. "Michael, you're not going to like this," he said. "Just tell me," I replied. "There's a secondary account under her name, all right. It's been active for over a year, and the withdrawals aren't random. They all lead to payments made to a company that handles private rental properties. My guess? She's been renting a place on the side." My stomach churned. "You're saying she's got a whole other life somewhere else?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's just 4 meetings. Either way, it doesn't look good." I thanked Rob and hung up, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Karen got home a few minutes later, carrying grocery bags and humming to herself as if nothing had happened. The sight of her acting so normal, so untouched by what she'd done, made my skin crawl. I couldn't take it anymore. "Karen," I said, stopping her in the kitchen. She froze mid-step, setting the bags on the counter. "Yes. What's this?" I asked, tossing a copy of the bank statement onto the counter. Her face went pale as she glanced at it, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with an excuse. "That's nothing. Just some savings I put aside for emergencies," she said weakly. "Really?" I stepped closer, my voice steady but cold. "Because Rob traced the money to a rental property. Care to explain what kind of emergency requires you to pay for a secret apartment?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time, she looked genuinely scared. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Then tell me what it is," I demanded. She didn't answer. That was all I needed to know. The next day, I decided it was time to track down Richard. The coward had been hiding since the night I found them together, avoiding the office and refusing to answer my calls. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook. A little digging told me he'd been working remotely from his suburban home, so that's where I went. When I pulled into his driveway, I saw him peek through the blinds before cautiously opening the door. His smug confidence from before had evaporated, replaced by nervousness. "Michael," he said, his voice shaking, "I don't think this is a good idea." "No, it's not," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "But we're doing it anyway." I closed the door behind me and stared him down. Richard was smaller than me, balding, and soft around the edges. I could have snapped him in half if I wanted to, and I think he knew it. "I want the truth," I said. "How long has this been going on?" "Michael, listen. Don't waste my time." I cut him off. "You're already lucky I didn't break your jaw the first time." He hesitated, then sighed. "Phoenix, about 6 months. It started at the office, drinks after work, that sort of thing. I didn't mean for it to get serious." "Serious?" I barked a laugh. "You think I care about your feelings? You came into my house, Richard. My bed. Do you understand what you've done?" You don't," I interrupted. "But you will, because I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are." Michael, please. No, I stepped closer, making him flinch. You don't get to beg. You get to deal with the consequences. Later that evening, back on the boat, I sat in the dark and let the anger simmer down. The confrontation had been satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Karen and Richard thought they could destroy my life and walk away unscathed. They were wrong, because now I had a plan. Karen had been relentless for weeks. Texts, calls, voicemails, emails, they never stopped coming. Every single one carried the same desperate refrain. We can fix this, Michael. Please, just talk to me. I ignored them at first. The sound of her voice only stoked the fury inside me, and every new notification on my phone felt like a fresh insult. But with every message, I knew this moment was inevitable. Eventually, I'd have to face her, and when I did, it would be on my terms. Once I had the truth in my hands, the hidden financial records, the text messages from Richard, and his spineless confession, it was time. She wasn't going to charm her way out of this or hide behind empty apologies. When her latest text buzzed in, "Lunch? Please, Michael, just one conversation. I'm begging you." I finally replied, "Deluigies. Noon. Don't be late." Her response came instantly. "Thank you. I love you so much. I'll be there." Her words felt hollow. If this was her idea of love, it wasn't worth saving. The next day, I arrived at DeLuigi's 10 minutes early, Karen's favorite restaurant. I'd sat at this table dozens of times before, celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, and milestones. I could still picture her laughing over a glass of wine, holding my hand as we talked about the life we'd built together. Now the place felt suffocating. The warm lighting and soft music felt wrong, too cheerful for the storm that was about to unfold. I sat in the corner, watching the door, and waited. At 12:05, Karen walked in. She was dressed deliberately. Her navy blouse and slacks were carefully chosen, the kind of polished look she knew I liked. She'd done her makeup lightly, just enough to look put together, but not overdone. She scanned the room nervously, her eyes locking onto mine. She forced a smile and approached, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. "Michael," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to this." I didn't answer. I let the silence sit heavy between us, watching her fidget with a napkin in her lap. "Should we order something?" she asked after a moment, her voice tentative. "No," I said flatly. "We won't be ordering." Karen flinched, but she nodded, folding her hands on the table. "Okay. I don't even know where to start." "Start with the truth," I said, leaning back in my chair. My tone was calm, but my gaze was unyielding. "Something you've had a lot of trouble with lately." Her cheeks flushed, and she dropped her eyes to the table. "Michael, I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you. But you have to believe me, it didn't mean anything. It was a stupid mistake, and I regret it more than I can say." I leaned forward. "A mistake?" My voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "Don't insult me, Karen. A mistake is locking your keys in the car or forgetting an anniversary. This was deliberate." Her head jerked up, her eyes wide. "No, it wasn't," she stammered. "It wasn't like that. I was feeling neglected. You were always working, always busy, and I just felt, I don't know, lonely. But I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly. "Neglected? Lonely? Is that the excuse you're going with?" "Karen, I worked my ass off to give you everything, a home, security, stability. I trusted you. I never once doubted you. And you repay me by sneaking around with that pathetic excuse for a man." Her eyes filled with tears, spilling over as she reached for a napkin. "Michael, please." "Save it," I snapped. "Save the tears, save the excuses, save the fake regret. I've heard enough lies from you to last a lifetime." She started sobbing in earnest, her shoulders shaking as she hid her face behind her hands. Once, I would have felt sorry for her. Once, I would have reached across the table, taken her hand, and told her everything would be okay. But now, her tears felt like nothing more than theater. "What do you want from me?" she choked out. "If it apologized." I ended things with him. "What else can I do to prove I love you?" I stared at her, my voice dropping into a deadly calm. "You can start by understanding that your love means nothing to me anymore. Not after what you've done. Not after 6 months of lies and betrayal. She looked up, her face crumpling again. But we've been together for 30 years, Michael. 30 years. Doesn't that count for something? It counted for everything, I said coldly. Until you threw it away. She stared at me, frozen. Then, something in her expression shifted. The desperation gave way to anger. You're just going to throw it all away? She snapped, her voice rising. After everything we've been through, you're just walking out? You're no better than I am if you're willing to give up so easily. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. The restaurant went quiet as a few heads turned in our direction, but I didn't care. Easily. I hissed. Do you think this is easy for me? You shattered everything I thought I knew about our life. You destroyed the trust one spent 30 years building with you. Do you think walking away is easy? It's not, but it's the only choice I have left. She sat back, stunned, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for words. For the first time, it seemed like she understood that this wasn't a negotiation. I'm filing for divorce, I said, standing up. You'll get your share, and that's it. We're done. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, Michael, don't do this. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I shook my head. You should have thought about that before you let him into our bed. Goodbye, Karen. Her hand shot out, grabbing my arm. Don't go, she begged. Please. I can't do this without you. I pulled my arm free, staring down at her one last time. You should have thought about that too. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. Walking out of that restaurant should have brought me closure. I thought leaving Karen sobbing at the table, watching her perfect little world crumble, would be enough to quiet the storm raging inside me. But it wasn't. Her betrayal wasn't something I could just move past, not without making sure both she and Richard paid the full price for what they'd done. 30 years of my life, our life, were now ashes because they decided their desires outweighed my trust. It was time for consequences. The first step in my plan was simple: protect what was mine. I met with my lawyer, Greg, the next morning. Greg had handled a few of my business contracts over the years, and I trusted him. When I told him I wanted to move forward with the divorce, he leaned back in his chair and gave me a long, measured look. You sure about this, Michael? Divorces aren't just expensive, they're messy. Things could get ugly, especially if your wife contests anything. She won't, I said firmly. She knows she's in the wrong. She won't fight it. Greg nodded slowly. All right. What about the business? Have you considered how this might impact it? That hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't thought about the firm, at least, not beyond how much work I'd buried myself in to build it. My company wasn't just a source of income. It was my legacy. The idea that Karen might try to claim part of it in the settlement made my blood boil. Is there a way to protect it? I asked. Greg flipped through some papers on his desk. You've got a strong case if we invoke a morality clause. If she tries to claim part of the business, we can argue that her actions violated the principles of partnership. It's a gray area, but given the evidence you've collected, we can make it stick. I nodded. Do it. Whatever it takes, make sure she doesn't touch the company. Greg raised an eyebrow. I'll need details. More than what you've told me so far. Everything. Don't leave anything out. For the next hour, I laid it all out. The night I caught her. The receipts, the messages, and the bank records that showed her payments for the secret apartment. When I finished, Greg looked grim. This isn't just a divorce, Michael, he said. It's a war. Good, I replied. Because I'm ready to fight. With the divorce in motion, I turned my attention to Richard. He might have been smug and confident when he walked into my house, but he wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. I started digging. Late nights were spent scrolling through social media, finding every scrap of information I could about him. His career, his connections, his reputation, it was all there, laid out like a roadmap. I wasn't just looking for leverage. I was looking for the chink in his armor, the one weakness that would bring him down. It didn't take long to find it. Richard had been climbing the ladder at his law firm for years, working his way into a partnership role. His reputation as a cutthroat dealmaker was well known, but so was his penchant for bending the rules. Whispered rumors of shady practices, Questionable ethics and conflicts of interest were all over the industry. I called a private investigator, someone I knew from a job I worked on years ago. His name was Frank, and he had a knack for finding things other people didn't want found. "Frank," I said over the phone, "I need you to look into someone for me." "Who's the target?" Frank asked, his tone businesslike. "Richard Palmer, junior partner at Wallace and Royce." There was a pause on the other end. "The attorney? What did he do to you?" I hesitated, debating how much to reveal. "He slept with my wife." Frank let out a low whistle. "That'll do it." "All right, Michael. I'll see what I can dig up. Give me a week." The week passed slowly, every day filled with tension as I waited for updates. Karen's calls and texts continued, but I ignored them. I wasn't ready to speak to her yet. Not until the divorce papers were served. Instead, I threw myself into the business, burying my anger in work. My partner, Alex, noticed something was off. "You're working harder than usual," he said one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe of my office. "Just keeping busy," I replied without looking up. "You want to talk about it?" "No," I said firmly. Alex nodded, sensing it wasn't the right time. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." "Thanks," I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. Frank called me the following Friday, and the tone in his voice immediately told me he'd struck gold. "Michael, you're going to love this," he said. "Your boy Richard? He's been dipping his hands into all sorts of dirty deals. Bribes to zoning officials, kickbacks from developers. He's not just bending the rules, he's breaking them." I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. How solid is the evidence? Solid enough. Emails, bank transfers, even a few recorded conversations. If you wanted to, you could take this straight to the press. Hell, the Bar Association would have a field day with it. "Good," I said. "Let's make sure they do." I sent everything Frank uncovered to a journalist friend of mine, someone I knew wouldn't shy away from a story like this. Within days, the headlines started rolling in. Prominent attorney caught in corruption scandal. Junior partner at Wallace and Royce under investigation for ethics violations. The fallout was swift. Richard's firm suspended him indefinitely, and the Bar Association announced a formal inquiry. His name, his career, and his carefully crafted reputation were all in shambles. But it wasn't enough. The man had walked into my home, destroyed my marriage, and laughed in my face. I wasn't done with him yet. Destroying Richard professionally was satisfying, but I wasn't done. His fall from grace was just the beginning. He had walked into my life, wrecked my marriage, and laughed in my face. It was time for him and Karen to feel the same pain they had inflicted on me. Karen's pleas to work things out continued to flood my phone. Calls, texts, voicemails. Her desperation was palpable. But I ignored her. Each message only strengthened my resolve. She thought this was about salvaging something broken. For me, it was about justice. The first article about Richard's corruption went live on a Monday morning, and by noon, the news had spread like wildfire. Junior partner at prestigious law firm accused of ethics violations. Attorney caught in bribery scandal. Corruption allégation Roch Wallace et Royce. I'd leaked the evidence Frank had gathered to a trusted journalist, and the fallout was swift. Richard was suspended from the firm, pending a formal investigation by the Bar Association. His name, once associated with success and cunning, was now synonymous with scandal and disgrace. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even picked up. "Michael," Richard's voice snarled through the line. "You think you're clever?" "Clever," I said coolly. "No, just thorough." "You think you can get away with this?" he spat. "I know you're behind it. You've made a mistake, and I'll make you pay for it." I laughed. "Richard, the only person who made a mistake was you, and you're already paying for it." "You're playing with fire," he warned, his tone laced with desperation. "You don't want me as an enemy. Richard, you've already lost, and if you think I'm afraid of you, you don't know me at all." Before he could respond, I hung up. His empty threats didn't concern me. He was flailing, desperate to hold on to the scraps of his reputation. But it was too late. While Richard's professional life burned, I turned my attention to Karen. She thought she could walk away with nothing more than a bruised conscience. But I wasn't letting her off that easy. 2 days after my meeting with Greg, she was served with divorce papers. I'd made sure the evidence of her infidelity was meticulously laid out, ensuring there was no room for her to contest the settlement. Greg had also invoked a morality clause to protect my business, locking her out of any claim to the firm. That same day, I made another call to Becky, one of Karen's closest friends. Becky had always been brutally honest, with a sharp tongue and little tolerance for nonsense. If anyone could ensure Karen faced the judgment she deserved, it was her. Michael. Becky's voice was cautious. We hadn't spoken much over the years, but she knew me well enough to sense something was wrong. I need to tell you something about Karen, I said, and I need you to hear it from me before it spreads. Over the next 10 minutes, I laid everything out. The affair, the apartment, the lies. Becky didn't interrupt, but I could hear the disbelief and growing anger in her silence. That, which, she finally said, she did this to you? She did, I replied, and I think it's time people knew the truth. You don't need to ask me twice, Becky said. Consider it done. The fallout was immediate. Becky wasted no time sharing what she'd learned with her circle of friends. By the end of the day, Karen's phone was flooded with calls and texts. Not from me, but from the same people she'd leaned on for sympathy and support. Her call came late that night, her voice shaking with anger and panic. Michael, what did you do? She demanded. I told the truth, I said simply. You've turned everyone against me, she shouted. They're treating me like I'm some kind of monster. Maybe because you are, I replied coldly. You betrayed me, Karen. You lied to me, humiliated me, and destroyed our marriage. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Her sobs on the other end of the line might have moved me once. Now they just felt hollow. Meanwhile, Frank was still digging into Richard's past. What he uncovered went beyond anything I had anticipated. Bribes to zoning officials, kickbacks from developers, even rumors of tax evasion. It was a treasure trove of corruption. Frank called me with an update a week after the first articles hit. Michael, I've got more for you, he said. Your boy Richard? He's dirtier than I thought. If you want, we can take this straight to the authorities. Do it, I said without hesitation. Make sure they get everything. Within days, the headlines shifted from allegations to criminal investigations. Disgraced attorney under federal scrutiny. Corruption scandal expands. New charges pending. Richard's life was unraveling, and every thread led back to his greed and arrogance. He destroyed my marriage, and now, his own was crumbling under the weight of his disgrace. Karen tried one last time to meet with me in person. She showed up unannounced at my office, looking pale and disheveled. The confident, composed woman I'd once known was gone, replaced by someone barely holding herself together. Michael, she said, standing in the doorway. Please, I just need a chance to talk. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. What is there to talk about, Karen? She stepped inside, her voice trembling. I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes, but I'm begging you, don't end this like this. Don't throw us away. I stood and walked around my desk, stopping a few feet from her. You didn't make a mistake, Karen. You made a choice. You chose to betray me, to lie to me, and to destroy everything we built. And now, you're dealing with the consequences. Tears streamed down her face. I love you, she whispered. I shook my head. No, you don't. If you did, we wouldn't be here. Her hand reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. Go home, Karen, I said firmly. There's nothing left to say. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw real defeat in her eyes. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Later that night, I sat on my yacht, watching the sun set over the water. The storm that had consumed my life was finally clearing. Richard's career was in ashes, Karen's social life had crumbled, and the divorce was moving forward without a hitch. For the first time in months, I felt peace. I thought I was done. I'd burned the bridges that needed burning, torn down the illusions that had held me captive, and walked away from the wreckage Karen and Richard had created. The divorce was in motion, Richard's reputation was beyond repair, and my life was finally mine again. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you think the dust has settled. It started with a phone call. I was on my boat, sitting on the deck with a cold beer, watching the waves roll in when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't one I recognized, but something told me to answer. Michael Baker? A woman's voice asked. Yes, I said cautiously. This is Amanda Palmer. I'm Richard's wife. I froze, unsure of what to say. After a moment, I asked, What do you want? She sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. I just thought you should know I've left him. I filed for divorce yesterday. Her words hit me like a wave. Richard's destruction had been thorough, and now, even his own family was abandoning him. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I know what he did to you, Amanda replied. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. It wasn't what I expected, and I wasn't sure how to respond. You don't need to apologize, I said finally. You didn't do anything. No, she said, her voice hardening. But I stayed with him when I should have left years ago. I knew he was a liar, a cheater, a terrible person. I just didn't know how far it went until now. There was a long pause before she added, If you ever want to talk about him, about any of it, call me. I think we've both been through enough to understand each other. I hung up feeling strangely unsettled. Amanda's words lingered in my mind for days. I hadn't expected to hear from her, let alone find common ground with someone who had been so close to the man who destroyed my marriage. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from Amanda in a small cafe. She'd reached out again, and curiosity got the better of me. She was nothing like I'd imagined. Polished but unpretentious, with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through people. I didn't think you'd come, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. I wasn't sure I would, I admitted. I don't blame you. She set her cup down and folded her hands on the table. I just thought, maybe it would help to talk. You've been through hell, and so have I. Maybe we can help each other make sense of it. Over the next hour, we talked. About Richard, about Karen, about the lies that had unraveled both our lives. Amanda told me about the years of manipulation and deceit she'd endured, and I told her about the night I walked in on Karen and Richard together. By the end of the conversation, I felt a strange sense of relief. Amanda understood my anger, my pain, in a way no one else could. And for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. As the weeks turned into months, my life began to rebuild itself. The divorce was finalized without much fanfare. Karen didn't contest the settlement, likely because she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. She kept the house, but the business and my finances were protected. Richard's downfall was complete. The last I heard, he was facing potential jail time for his corruption charges, and his name had become a cautionary tale in legal circles. And Amanda? She became an unexpected ally. What started as shared commiseration over coffee turned into something deeper, a friendship built on mutual understanding and trust. One afternoon, as we sat on the deck of my yacht, she turned to me and said, You know, you've got a lot of life left to live, Michael. Don't let them take that away from you. She was right. I'd spent months consumed by anger, by the need for revenge. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a future beyond the wreckage. A year after it all began, I found myself back at Deluigi's, not for confrontation, but for celebration. Amanda and I sat at the same table where I'd once faced Karen, laughing over a bottle of wine and sharing stories about the new paths we'd forged. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Amanda and I will become more than friends, or maybe we'll remain two people who found solace in each other's company. Either way, I've learned something important. Betrayal doesn't have to define you. Karen and Richard tried to destroy me, but they only succeeded in showing me my own strength. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Looking back on everything, I realize now that betrayal doesn't just hurt, it changes you. It forces you to confront truths you'd rather avoid and to see people for who they truly are. Karen's betrayal shattered the life I thought I knew, but it also gave me something unexpected: clarity. Richard and Karen didn't just betray me, they freed me. Their actions burned away the illusions I'd been clinging to for years. And while it took time to see it, I've come to understand that I'm better off without them. The revenge I sought wasn't just about making them pay. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self. In the process, I discovered that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. Now, as I sit on my yacht, Watching the sunset over the water, I feel a peace I haven't felt in years. I've rebuilt my life, surrounded myself with people who truly care about me, and let go of the anger that once consumed me. To anyone out there who's been through something similar, my advice is this: don't let betrayal define you. Learn from it, grow stronger, and above all, remember that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's living well.